Thanks, Payland. So welcome again to Pushing the Boundaries of Public Sector Innovation. Today's topic is number 3 in Theory of Change, and we are your co-hosts. So the 27e Région team there can give a little wave, Stéphane and Georgia, and I already forget your name, Philippe? Philippe, I got it, I remember. From 27e Région have designed this series with us. And these are your other co-hosts in the larger project. I'll talk a little bit at the end about the next series that's starting in a couple short weeks. But in the meantime, settle in and relax and know that you're well hosted here in our journey together. The series, you can go to the next slide, Stéphane. This process is a multi-month learning journey, I guess, in our community of practice together. So we're just finishing up this first loop, this first cycle on focused on theories of change for transformation. And you can see we're in February, not December. Of course, the timelines have shifted, as they do. The next cycle is focused on connecting inner and outer transformation work and will begin in February. The third cycle is starting to take a little bit of shape, and we'll have more news on that one soon, I think. And we're going through until later this year with a few more sessions in the fall, also to be determined. But this is where you are in our meandering series of discussions about pushing the boundaries of public sector innovation. We have a very special guest today, Cécile from Sciences Po, who is going to take us through, or provoke us, I guess, maybe provoke us in some conversation about depoliticization and conflict and tension and debate and the role of public sector innovation and innovators in that space as part of our practice. And then we have some discussion prompts for us to talk about what Cécile invites us into through her presentation. A little bit about theories of change. Again, for those of you who've been here before, you've seen this already. Little cartoon about why I think theories of change are interesting and important for us to talk about and explore as people doing public sector innovation work, as we think about pushing the boundaries of our practice. So bearded, necktied person saying, pointing out the strategy for a program where we have an activity of lunch subsidies for schools that will lead to this amazing outcome of ending world hunger, without unpacking some ideas that are probably, and activities that are probably essential in between those spaces. So this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek for us, I think, as people who do public sector innovation work, but not too far off from some of my experiences where we're given a very ambitious outcome, or we set it for ourselves and don't always have the theory, the conditions, the resources, the skills required, the time often required to actually get us to where we're trying to go. So we are in this series focused on theories of change, really exploring the space in between our activities and our big goals to see if there's some ways that we can improve our practice in that space. Over to you, Stéphane and Georgia.
Thank you, Lindsay. So yes, for those of you who discover this group, have in mind that we are trying to explore how we could handle more radical theory of change in public sector innovation. So a few words of where we are now for those of you who are not attending the 2 last sessions. We had 2 interesting sessions, session 1 and session 2, where we discovered that if we want to build more radical theory of change, then we need to be careful about language. And this is connected with the example of the city of Nantes, who made a presentation based on what they called markers. They got 6 markers who are sort of theory of change on social justice, ecological transition, coalition of territories, and so on. And we saw how they care about how they describe the diagnosis, the priorities, the direction that they want, also the criteria of success that they want to use to build a common vision for all the civil servants in the city. So if you want to know more, you can have a look to the link that we have mentioned. But we also had an interesting presentation showing us that when we want to handle complex issues like territories where there are identities issues like overseas territories of France, like La Réunion, then we had an interesting conversation about how do you need to reveal the taboos of the history of the island, of the different communities, and how it creates kind of trigger points. Isabelle Huet, who made the presentation, was organizing a training on cultural resilience in Réunion Island, and she described very interestingly how it creates change in the mindset of people, how it was trigger point. They realized that the history of that they have a better understanding of the history of the island and why there were so many opposition and so on. So again, you can have a look to the presentation she made on the link. So we had a few insights of how to get there and how to be more radical. But the topic that we want to share with you today is, okay, we all are people who want to do radical change, but how to do it in a situation of contrary winds, when the public debate is so shrinked, locked, and polarized since a few years, both in North America and in Europe. So it's like going in the other side of the trend. So how do we do that? And that's why today we want to engage a conversation about how do you take public debate, democratic debate, the situation of public debate today in your theory of change. What's need to be done when you build your theory of change, not to be disconnected with the situation of the democratic debate. And just to give you a few signs of what we get here in France, a few weeks ago, we have launched a small survey in 20 local government here in France about feminism. How do cities like Paris or counties or regional government deal with feminism, and because all of them have interest in it and they have policies and so on. And what we have get from this small survey, again, it's not a very scientific survey, but first there is the issue that there is not much diversity in administration. So the minorities are not there. So we are and most of the top managers are men. So beyond even feminism, we got a problem with when we talk about minorities, but they are not there. There is also this phenomena that we get is that when you talk about feminism within administration, there are two different situations. One is they are seen, the people in charge of feminism, gender activities and so on, are sometimes seen as dangerous activists because they are seen as people who come from social fight and so on. So they are avoided overpass because they are seen as activists, or in the other direction, because they are not systematically pushing strong policies, or it's mostly gender mainstreaming. It's seen as feminism washing. So we were very upset to see that it was not so easy to deal with feminism within public organization those days in France, at least. I don't know in US, or North America, even if I got some ideas, but we can bring this on the table. It's really not so easy here in France. Of course, there is also the problem of words who make people angry. The words like wokeism, intersectionality are kind of words that you cannot use within organization. There is really a polarization of the debate here in France. There are books, the press is talking about this. I mean, it's really very polarized. So be careful of the word you use when you deal with social justice and this kind of thing in public organization. And there is also the idea that there are mechanisms that stuck public debate, and this is what Cécile today with us we'll talk about. It's called depolitization. So we feel that many public projects, many notably in the field of innovation, are depoliticized. So we don't want to see the political part of it, but just the neutral aspect of it, even if we don't think any project is neutral. And this is what we'd like to share with you today is how do we deal with this shrinking public debate? How do we identify how it happens? And of course, what could we do to overpass it, to handle it? So it's not only sharing the diagnosis and getting your experience and your own examples, but in the last part of the session, we'd like to find ideas, insights, strategy, tips, because we feel that it's getting more and more difficult. So this is where we are, but don't hesitate to ask any question if things are not clear. So today and just for for you remember, we have used these drawings to show where we are. You want to example?
Yes. Actually, this drawing may be not new to who already participated to the previous session on theory of change, but actually for newcomers, actually, me and Stefan, when we were reflecting on the rationale, gathering these 3 sessions on different aspects of public sector innovation, on how to make it more radical, we wanted to represent it, to give a representation which was less technical, less operational, but maybe more profound, or actually linked to the idea and the mindset that we wanted to share with you and to discuss with you. And so just to describe it, to describe this kind of tree, our idea is that change, and in this case, a theory of change, is rooted in a non-linear path that can take different paths at the same time, dealing with problems which are even weak sometimes, also unexpected events, a lot of complexity. And in this process, we are trying to seeing all the aspects and the ingredients, if you want, that can lead to change, to the direction that we expect, that the impact that we want to create. And these ingredients, these energy in our idea comes from experimentation to a prototypical approach to training, a discussion, and also to participation. So all these ingredients in this occasion, in discussing about the depoliticization, actually are brought all together. And also this discussion led us to thinking and discussing about how we have to question and change also the roots of the system that we want to change and innovate. So we have to deal with seeing and changing perspective on values and beliefs that are the basis of another rock that we have to question and to break in a metaphorical way. It is the dominant systems that our public actions or public process are rooted on. And so actually, I think that this closing perspective on depoliticization actually opens to the discussion on all these elements and gives us the perspective of understanding how actually debate entails a multi-level challenge on all these elements.
Thank you, Georgia. So, Cécile, are you ready to help us growing this tree against poor and polarized public debate?
Ready to try, at least.
The floor is yours.
So many thanks for the invitation, of course, and the presentation, the introduction of my intervention. So, few words to begin. I am Cécile Robert. I am political science professor in Sciences Po Lyon. I used to teach a lot on the European Union and European Union policies, which are also my main research field, with transparency and lobbying. But I also like to work in a thematic and cross-disciplinary manner on, for example, managerialization, expertise, and depolitization, which is the theme of my talk today. So to do so, I'm going to draw on the book I edited and worked on with colleagues from different disciplines, as it is shown in the table of contents you will see later. So I think it's a great opportunity for an academic book to shed light on the thought of those who take action. And if it inspires or enlightens you a little, I'd be very delighted. So in the same spirit, all comments and criticism are welcome, of course, and I'm very interested in your feedback. So of course, I won't present the book in details today. I understood from my discussion before with Stefan and Georgia that this session is part of a longer process, and you say it again in your introduction, of a longer process of reflection on the transformation of public action and the obstacles that can be encountered when trying to innovate in this field. So if maybe this reflection, our reflection could be useful, it could be, for example, because depolitization can be a difficulty in thinking about this transformation, but also, I hope, a lever if we know how to identify it. So given that we are on video and that you have already understood it, English isn't my first working language, it may be difficult for you to understand me at times, so please don't hesitate to interrupt. So in order to share with you some of the results and avenue for reflection and action, I'm going to follow the plan below. I let Stefan select in the slide.
So three-part plan.
Yeah, exactly. So first, I'll go back over some definitions as briefly as possible, starting by defining depolitization. What are we talking about in this book? Then in a second step, I'll try to identify a few clues that will help you, I hope, spot when you're faced with a situation of depolitization. This is the longest part, as it explains how depolitization, in our opinion, works, and also the circumstances and privileged context in which depolitization occurs. And thirdly, very quickly, and depending on the time available, some thoughts on what is at stake in this depolitization. Why should we try to remedy it? And I hope that it will be possible to discuss the relationship with citizens. It implies the relationship between public action and democracy, but also openness to knowledge, openness to the social science. So first, what are we talking about in this book? As you can see on the slide table of contents, this book is a product of several years of exchanges with colleagues working on very different public policies in also very different national contexts. For example, security policies in major French cities, environmental policies, management of the AIDS epidemic by international organization in Tanzania, philanthropy and breast cancer in North America and Canada, for example. So in working together, our goal was to use the pooling of very different situations to identify the common features that make these public policies, or sometimes lack of them, democratically undisputable. So what do we mean when we talk about depoliticization? Depolitization or depoliticization, I don't know exactly which term is the best. Depoliticization consists in ways of saying and doing public policies, or sometimes of renouncing to do them, which have in common the fact that they work to circumvent the democratic debate on them. They don't appear as public and political choice. To do so, there are mechanisms of depolitization of public action that we have tried to identify in the book. Those mechanisms are ways in which certain policies are made and thought about, with the result that they are never put up for discussion. They appear to be unavoidable, or on the contrary, unthinkable, without stakes, purely technical. To study or to be able to identify depolitization, of course, we need a definition of what is a political decision. It will be the last one, I promise. So political decision, for us, whether or not they are presented as such, they are assumed as such, are always choices which have consequences on the scale of society. In other words, those political decisions are never reducible to the pure management of constraints, arbitration in values between different or even contradictory interests. So they are presented as sometimes pure management of constraints, but they are always arbitration in values and between different or even contradictory interests. So I give you a few examples of political decisions that are central for public policies we studied. For example, the choice in the fight against global warming to insist on citizen action. We call that in French, petit geste, little gesture for citizens. So the fact to insist on citizen action without putting on the table the possibility of banning the most polluting industrial activities, or sometimes insisting on the fact that the degree of pollution is linked and very strongly linked to the poorness or the richness of the population. For example, in the case of breast cancer, so the chapter in the book focus on the pink ribbon campaigns. I don't know if you see what I am talking about, and it shows that they use those campaigns in France or in North America. They choose to construct the cancer as an individual battle, rather than a public health issue, linked in particular to collective causes. And the companies are paying for the events around the pink ribbon campaigns are sometimes more the problem than the solution. The choice, another example of choice, in the fight against the AIDS epidemic in Tanzania, of prevention policies via sex education and the setting up of dispensaries without mentioning never mentioning a reform of the hospital system. And I will come back later to the fact that the scientific studies on AIDS and AIDS propagation in Africa shows that they are more linked to the state of the population and the state of the public hospitals than to the sexual practices. But the IO, because it's very difficult to have a discussion with the nation, they choose to insist on sexual education. Another example, when it comes to managing conflict of interest or controlling lobbying at the EU level, the choice to consider that the issue is transparency rather than limiting them, so the limiting the lobbying, and ethics rather than the law. And as a final example of public services, for example, for example, the public services, we can see that their territorial organization in France, their financing, their objectives, they are assigned, and the values they are asked to embody are all political choices between different possible options, and they are not always presented as such in the public debate. So in a democracy, the choice between different public policy options should normally be the subject of a public and adversarial debate between different existing options. And at the end of these debates, elected representatives explain their choices and citizens can hold them to account. But how can this choice be removed from the debate, disappearing from the eyes of those who make them and are the object of this public policy? So I come now to my second part and to explain how depolitization works, how it is possible to see public debates shrink, as Stefan said just before. By working together on very different public policy, our aim was to identify common ways of saying or doing public action which have the effect of making political choices disappear. Them today, my aim is to share with you points of reference or perhaps rather clues that will enable us to identify when a process of depolitization is at work, whether through the way in which the problem to be addressed is constructed by the public debate, or through the decision-making procedures that are favored by administration and political actors. So to do this, I'm going to look at three dimensions. First, ways of saying, so rhetorical devices, then ways of doing, so certain types of decision-making processes that make the trade-off and choices on which public policies are based purely invisible. And third, privileged context, certain institutional or organizational contexts, as well as societal ones, also make trade-off less visible and less easy to debate political choices in public action. Of saying, what are the typical ways of presenting public policy by depoliticizing them and obscuring the trade-off? We have identified and distinguished three of them. It is perhaps the more abstract part of my presentation, so I will try to give some example. The first method is to naturalize the decision. We say in France, naturaliser. I'm not sure that it is a good synonymous. But it's a way to present political decision as they were imposed on those who make them, as they were purely dictated by principle, for example, the law, or constraints, for example, health constraints, but also economic constraints, which would leave decision makers no room for maneuver, no alternative. So maybe you may recognize Margaret Thatcher's famous "There is no alternative," the TINA. But more recently, for example, colleagues who have worked on the history of tax policies in the United States have highlighted the very important role played by fatalism and defeatism in legitimizing reforms aimed at lowering taxes for the wealthiest. They presented them always as the only possible way, for example, of preventing their expatriation. And it plays a huge role in the trajectory of this public policy. Second ways of saying is to present the political choices as neutral, objective, impartial. In other words, it denies inequalities upstream. So the fact that the decision amounts to arbitrating between distinct interests, and it denies also inequalities downstream by concealing the differentiated effects of the decision on citizens. So, for example, the study on the management of the AIDS epidemic in Tanzania shows that international organizations are doing their utmost to avoid assuming the health inequalities that will result from the strategies they have adopted to prevent and treat the disease. They impose the sorting of patients, but they delegate the responsibility of the sort to other actors, here local NGOs. So we welcome the cat. For example, the article on local safety policies by elected municipal officials in France as non-partisan and purely technical issues, as if those safety policies were only as if there were only one way of conceiving safety, as if it corresponded to the same thing for every citizen, and also as if its maintenance were guaranteed in the same way everywhere and for everyone. So to avoid them. Finally, there are third ways of depoliticizing the issues at stake in public action. It's to individualize them, to emphasize the individual responsibility for the occurrence of the problem and its resolution, in order to avoid constructing them as collective problems. For example, when it comes to dealing with the AIDS epidemic, our approach is approach it as a problem linked to individual practices, in this case sexual, whereas epidemiological studies show that the causes are also and mainly collective. So as I said before, the state of health of the population favors transmission, and the disease is also very, very often caught in hospitals. We also see this in relation to breast cancer as a matter of personal struggle, minimizing environmental, industrial causes, but also in relation to the environment, as is the fight against global warming depended above all on the small gesture of each individual and not on political decision banning this or that product. And one of the ways of individualizing public problems is also to psychologize them. So many problems apprehended with an individualistic and psychology reading can also be the subject of a more social reading. We have a lot example in the book and in our mind, and stress management at work, for example, work-life balance, failures at school, and so on. So to sum up, depolitization can take the form of individualization, neutralization, or naturalization, and in each case, these are ways of presenting problems that obscure the aspects that would legitimize discussion of them. No room for maneuver, no differentiated effects, not a collective problem. They no longer appear in the discourse as societal choices. I'd now like to return very, very briefly to a second way of depoliticizing, of cutting short the debate, which is not only a matter of discourse, of course, but also comes from the way institutions are organized to deal with these problems. Of course, decision-making procedures are very linked to the way we construct the issue in the public debates. But it's important to analyze them separately. So the depoliticizing approaches to public action often share two characteristics. Firstly, they often involve recourse to expertise, the law, or the consultation of interest groups. They often keep political players at a distance and relieve them, at least in part, of responsibility for decision-making. They reinforce a representation of the subject they deal with as purely technical issue, in other words, not requiring debate and arbitration. For example, the agentification is a very good way of dealing with public issues without politicizing them. So their common feature, the second common features, is that part of the work is carried out in secret. This secrecy is more or less total and more or less assumed and may be justified by the seriousness of the situation or the stakes involved or the need to protect those in charge from outside pressure. But in all cases, the idea behind the choice of secrecy is that it is important to consider the public nature of debates not as a necessary condition, but as an obstacle for effective deliberation. A third clue or element that may indicate situation of depolitization concerns the organizational, institutional, or cultural context. I will be very brief on that dimension too. We have identified several major reasons for resorting to depolitization, and it can be said that those strategies are more likely to be encountered in situations where, first, political authorities want to avoid putting a new policy on the agenda, or they want to limit its ambition. So, for example, the psychologization of school failure, rather than a major reform of public school, the promotion of small individual gesture rather than a more coercive environmental policy, ethics rather than regulation, etc. Second type of context, context in which political debate is perceived as an ineffective or even dangerous way of dealing with a problem. For example, the first example is tragic choices. So situation where the goods needed to survive, avoid suffering or any other problem, are in short supply for the member of a community. So, for example, a typical example is given by health crisis and sanitary crisis, for example, the COVID, where the political actors have to do tragic choices, and they want to avoid them publicly debate. They want to avoid public debate on that. Other contexts are, for example, cultural, organizational, and institutional contexts, where politicizing a subject, having a debate between several contradictory options, appears to be something that can be dangerous for the community. So 3 examples. For example, we observe this at the level of small French rural commune. It appears that the smaller the village, the more we hear about the need not to politicize. While at the same time we observe very violent conflicts between people, because without politicization, it becomes also personal. So I will come back for some example if you want. We can also think of certain for example, the EU, where politicization is perceived as something that can destroy cooperation, destroy, for example, supranational institutions. And finally, there are North American authors, I don't know if you know Nina Eliasov, who have shown that in the North American context, politicization is perceived sometimes as a negative emotion for individuals, rather than an emancipating or liberating one. So it is advised to those people to avoid politics because it's bad for them. For example, women with breast cancer in the Pink Ribbon campaigns, they are told to avoid politics because it is bad for health and for their positive attitude against the cancer. So I now come to my third and very quick part, why opposing depolitization and wanting to repoliticize. So in my opinion, for several reasons. First, because depolitization, as I have tried to show in this presentation, in the sense of bypassing democratic debate, damages democracy, creates ignorance among citizens, and discourages them from getting involved. And I have some example to share with you if we have time enough to do that. For the creation of ignorance and for the fact that it discourages them from getting involved. And the other reason is also why it is good to repoliticize, at least to try, in a more positive way, because repoliticizing means, in particular, first, to rediscover alternatives to existing policy and maybe operations that may have been forgotten or dismissed too quickly, and reopening debate on them, so enlarging our public debate. It means also repoliticizing to reflect more deeply on the effects and consequences of political choices and public policies in terms of interest and values. What interests are at stake, how they are taken, how are they taken care of, what values are preserved through a given choice of public policy. And third, repoliticize is also to involve or to try to involve citizens in the construction of public choices that concern them by presenting public policy as choices and making the issues at stake clear or more clearer. And if we manage to do that, it encourages citizens to take an interest in public life and maybe to take part in it more actively. So many thanks for your attention. I hope that it was not too long.
No.
I haven't seen any emergency
warning? No.
sign.
You're on time.
Again, don't hesitate to ask me if something was not clear. It's quite hard to speak English at distance, so sorry. But
You did well. You did very well, Cécile. I really like, generally speaking, that you help us to have a more political vision of change and public innovation. So more generally speaking, thank you for that. Before we shift to a more reflexive moment where you will be invited to think about your own case, situation, etc. Is there any question for clarification or any comments from you guys?
I've got one question. Cécile, I wonder, I don't quite know how to ask it yet, but I'll try. I'm just wondering about like the relationship between what feels like a cultivation of more extreme polarity. It's either this or it's that, rather than like there's a spectrum of possibilities in between showed up, because it seems like that is a depoliticizing maneuver. Like it can be that anyway, where we're given these stark contrasting choices, and then we feel like it can only be one thing or the other thing, and that we can't actually discuss other possibilities in between. I'm just wondering what your views are about that, about polarization.
to be sure to have quite well understood what you said, you mean that the polarization of the debate could be a way to depoliticize because it avoids public debate. Yes, I think it's a perfect example of what we saw in France the last 10 years, probably, about a lot of subjects. For example, we have debates about the university in France and the public university concerning the fact that the wokeism is growing a lot, and as if it was the main problem of public university. And during this period, we have lost the hugest amount of jobs position, and the private university has become a very, very profitable market in France, increasing by a third. So I think that sometimes to polarize and to is a way to avoid a public debate on other aspects of the issue of the object of the public policy. And sometimes it's also a way to show that, you see, if we try to debate, it will become a huge mess. So, it's a big mess when I think that for example, we have a lot of books which have explored the depolitization from the perspective of party. And for example, in the United Kingdom, and the crisis of party, and they show that. For example, the polarization between the far right and the far left is a way for the center to get some room of maneuver, to do some apparently depoliticized public policies, and to occupy the field. I don't know if it's a good way of, if it's a good translation. So I think that, yes, we could also analyze polarization as a way of showing that a political debate is not a good way to have to construct and to build together public choices. I hope that I answer to your question. So I see that
there is a question for you, Cécile, saying, Martin enjoyed your presentation. I asked, can theory of change be helpful to support re-politicization? And I think this is where we are going now during this session, is can we build theories, and what should these theories look like if we want to support re-politicization? What you ask, what our need for re-politicization, what would you answer?
I think it's a question for the specialist you are. I'd be delighted to help, but I'm not specialist of, you know.
I take the question, and maybe I don't know, but I was thinking, listening to you, that maybe when we build theory of change, we should include in our evaluation criteria what you have described. I mean, how do we have a vision on the risk of the 5 risks, on the 5 phenomena that you described, naturalization, etc. So maybe we should include it in our theory of change, and especially in our evaluation tools or our negotiation tools when we accept project or negotiate for project. Maybe we could include those kind of criteria. I think I must admit that we don't specifically look at this for now, and I think we could be better at including your 5 your 5 mechanism in our theory of change, and especially in our evaluation tools.
I might also add that I think that we can the inward work of an individual innovator or a team or a unit can make sure we're not depoliticizing our own practice, let alone the outward, our own the way that we think about what it is that we're doing. Because I've seen lots of examples of labs that use the word innovation without saying what they mean by that, or I think there's some, they're not simple, but there's accessible, I think, things that we can do as practitioners to make sure that we're not falling into the traps that you've described, Cécile, in our own practice, in our own ways of working. Because when we're in these contexts that are kind of asking us or requiring us to depoliticize our work in different ways, subtly often, we can just get into that being the usual way that we have to work without thinking about that and pushing back against that.
There is a
I wonder what the person, was it Martin? I wonder if you have, I don't know if you want to jump in on that, but like, what do you think about your question?
Yeah, hold on, let me turn my video on. Yeah, I can say a word on that. I think that just by going through the whole process of theory of change, you try to make your assumptions explicit, you try to make trade-offs explicit. You open yourself up for input and for criticisms, for reflection. So I think the process itself of developing a TOC is already like a form of repoliticization. So I think just going through that process is already a form of that. And if you then also open up that whole process for more like outside stakeholders, yeah, you even make it more so.
I think there is also an interesting comment from Annie, but I think she had to leave. But she says, how to depoliticize when you're a civil servant. And I think that's something we often hear from civil servants who are supposed to be neutral. So maybe, Cécile, what kind of advice could you give to civil servants who are, I mean, the regulation is changing in France, for instance, because civil servants here in France can they can demonstrate, they can be, comment on dit lanceur d'alerte? I don't know.
Whistleblowers.
Yeah.
They can be whistleblower.
Yeah. So now civil servants are not supposed to be totally neutral. They have a voice, etc. But what you do say to Annie, who says, "Oh, come on, it's not easy to re-politicize when you're a civil servant and neutral."
No. No, I'm sure that it is not easy. I have a discussion about that regularly with my husband, which is a civil servant, and he said to me that it is quite complicated because it depends, of course, on the relationship with the political actors who are responsible for decision, but they are. I think that maybe it could be not by assuming political responsibility for this or that choice for civil servants, because they are not able to do that, they are not entitled to do that, but maybe to prepare some argument and discussion before with political actors, trying to make more explicit, as Martin said, the choices behind the interest or the arbitration between different interests and different values behind this or that solution, which is for example preferred by the political actors. So to have the to try, if it's possible, to ask to political actors to be more conscious, and if it's possible, more explicit in front of their electors, their constituents, to be more conscious and more explicit on the arbitration they made, choosing this or that solution. And this, for me, it means to have it is linked to the capacity of analyzing each option by trying to make more visible the impact, the effect, the consequences of solutions. So the reflection before action and the materials and the food for thought that are given to political actors by civil servants are very important in this process of repoliticizing public action. And maybe to finish, it could be by using more social sciences. I don't want to advocate for my parish. I don't know if it's a good translation in English, but I think that we had in France, for example, a tradition of social sciences in the ministers. and they produced their own studies. For example, for the Education Nationale Minister, for Environmental Minister, they have their own cells of research, and it was very interesting to. It was a very interesting resources for re-politicizing, because they gave a lot of course, they gave a very interesting light on the effect, consequences, and of course, for example, evaluation, assessment is a very good lever to repoliticize, at least if it is used as such, and not only to say we have there was an assessment.
I like you.
I was too long.
I like your advocacy for social science, but sometimes social science has the same problem of shrinking. I heard yesterday that there is a US state, in a university in the US state, who has suppressed all the social science departments because the governor or whatever think that social science is part of the problem.
Yeah.
So we could have another workshop about the shrinking space for social science in our research policies and so on. So, but that's another topic. Lindsay, do you think we should shift to another? We had the idea to get your own experience, because we had many experience, many cases from Cécile, linking with global warming and many cases. But maybe it would be interesting to get your own cases, to get both your own cases that you have met during your work as public innovators, and so more generally the cases that you see around. For instance, in France, I could mention also maybe more dedicated, more in the perimeter of public innovation, the non-debate we had all these years about digitalization, administration digitalization. It became a mantra, a doctrine from the national state, but there was no debate. And now we are realizing that 3 million, 4 million people, 5 million people are victim of the administration divide because of the digitalization, and it was seen and promoted as a progress for many people. So this is typically the thing that where there is no debate. It's seen as probably it's naturalization. There is no question about it. And we see some labs in France, here in France, who has advocacy for changing it. So sometimes labs from the ground, and notably the labs from Bretagne, as get an audience from the national state level, recognizing that maybe digitalization was a failure, was not a good policy, and it's because of labs from the ground that the national state is realizing that maybe it was wrong. So that's an interesting situation where labs can have a role because they defend, because they use social sciences, because they bring evaluation, and at a certain point, the national state could not say there was no problem. So yeah, we got some very interesting example here. But maybe we can spend 5, 6, 7 minutes on the slide for each of you to mention a few examples or insight that you have in mind. Okay. So you got the link to the slide, and you can fill it.
Or jump into our conversation, or drop something into the chat too.
Yeah. maybe we can start commenting, and there are interesting quotes there. For instance, I like the idea that in many of our organizations there are some subjects that are not seen as interesting. There are some topics that don't deserve a debate because they are seen as trivial, basics, or not worth talking about. That's interesting. Is there someone that want to comment his comment or others comment? Yeah. Right. Mm.
This is making me think about, like, there's a real sort of energy of exhaustion about, like, oh, we can't talk about everything because we'd never get anything done. There's a culture in, maybe, or there's a cultural dimension here too that's like, it's, I mean, like anything, it's partly true and also a construction. But
Yeah, no
there
action.
seems to be a common thread in some of these comments about
Yeah,
that.
no quick action would be worse than a good decision-making process.
I was also thinking about, and maybe this can lead us to the next prompt, but I was just reflecting on a phenomenon that in Italy, actually we had actually just before the latter government of technical governments, just one after the other. This made me think of us as citizens being getting used to technicality, to neutral or no alternative ways of guiding public action, of making political choices. So I was thinking about also the need to talk about the phenomenon of depoliticization itself, because otherwise we're not aware actually of having this risk, and to be already like immersed in a depoliticized context and political scenario. So in this Italian case, it's like we got used to the idea of the absence of a debate, of a discussion of among options, because actually for a long time political decisions were made as just neutral, as or actually integrating many of the elements that Cécile presented. So neutral choices, or neutral, or the absence of alternatives. So I think also a case itself is to think about a context which is depoliticized, no matter the subject.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like I don't know if we can add this to the 5 mechanisms that Cécile described, but there is also this problem of decreasing quality, growing turnover, all things doing with the lack of quality in terms of management, being rigorous, and so on. So in the mood now in French government is is quite bad. There is a lack of attractivity. There was an event today here in Paris at high level on the sense of of public policies, the sense of public services. What is it for? I mean, we don't know anymore what is it for. What is the meaning of this? So when you are at this level of interrogation, it's been that the mood is not at debating, taking the time to diversify thinking, diversify option, and so there is also the way and the atmosphere that we have in our public organization now those days. Any other comment that we want to comment before we shift to the next? The next session will be more solution oriented in a way. So, but probably we need to explore other comments before we shift. Any other?
I think we should shift stuff on because we're running a bit short on time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's shift. So now the idea, and we need your help, Cécile, also, is to, and that's connected to the question someone asked, is how could theory of change be helpful to repoliticize? What do you have in mind in terms of new roles to unlock public debate? What kind of strategy, practice, skills, etc.? What could help? So again, maybe we can spend a few minutes writing a few insights and ideas.
Thank you.
Wow, that's cool. Many ideas, tips. Does someone want to comment and to tell a bit about his suggestion? Judith or Lily or Maggie?
I can chime in. I was thinking about, yeah, just how this plays out, I guess, on the person, like on the personal and interpersonal level. And yeah, I was even just hearing about this happening yesterday and was thinking about the questions that I would have asked a person who was using a depoliticized, kind of like naturalized justification for something and just saying, well, this is how it's going to be. And there's no room for changes at this time, and just kind of continuing to ask why, or because who decided that. And so, yeah, I was thinking about how the depolitization also it like removes our accountability, or makes us more distant from our accountability as people and organizations. So how can we reorient to that?
That's interesting, because maybe as you, I see it as a personal new radar for having a better conscience of it and being more, it's like a muscle that we need to develop. And I think the five mechanisms that Cécile described help us to be more conscious of that and being more aware of, okay, I know what it is. This is naturalization. This is, I think we already know of this notion, but if we can use it more systematically, integrate in our tools, criteria, etc. And as I mentioned, at least not being part of the depolitization process, because sometimes we don't realize that by accepting some partnership or some project, or accepting it in a certain way, we are part of the problem of. That's why I like the idea that repolitization is the best friend of systemic change and evaluation, and maybe it can help us to nourish our evaluation criteria, systemic change tools, etc. But I think it's very connected. Any other ideas that you want to comment?
I wanted to add just what I was thinking and writing about, that is maybe so obvious and trivial to a certain extent, but actually we are talking about public innovation, public sector innovation, and maybe you have different experience, but I quite see that we are reading or hearing about public innovation again as a quite technical or natural process. So we have to remind ourselves and the outer world that actually the process itself of public innovation cannot be taken as granted, as technical, as one direction, just one option. So maybe when we are trying to describe an expected transformation, an expected improvement, we have to explicit and also debate about our vision of why this is an improvement to us and to our community.
There are so many ideas. I can't comment them. No, but I'm happy that you got so many ideas, but because honestly, that's not so easy to link theory of change and the political perspective that we try to have. But I think it's a new dimension that theory of change can get into, being more politically engaged, more politically aware, more connected to the real situation that we get now in the public debate. And I'm sure it might be a new dimension for theory of change. It's 6. Is there anyone who wants to? I mean, we will make sure that we will collect very precisely all your comment ideas, because all our gems that we want to take care of. But if any of you want to describe his idea or suggestion or insight, please. Cécile, do you want to do you have a comment or?
Yes, very few and very general, sorry, but I find it very interesting to read you on the slide. Perhaps three points very briefly. The first that is that as we say, once again, it's not just about the individual, and of course, for the re-politicization, it's exactly like the depoliticization. We to avoid the idea that we are we're responsible for a global, very global situation. So depoliticization is has been observed in very numerous Western democracies. It has been connected to very deep changes, for example, the abstention, the growing abstention, the lack of the decreasing of the politics party, and it is a very big transformation of our society. So it is not so easy to fight against depoliticization. And as Georgia said, for example, in certain contexts, it is deeply yes, it is now became quite the common way of making public policy in certain national contexts. So it was the first observation. The second one is the discouragement is an important force towards depoliticization, and it may be important to be able to fight this discouragement and to be able to the belief in the capacity of actors to change, to do some let the people and the not the participants, but the beneficiaries of the public policy to let them believe that if they take part, they could be a part of the solution, and they have it exists room for maneuver. And the last point, sorry, it was about I thought about a lot of research made concerning the agnotology, maybe you know, ignorance. I thought to Robert Proctor, who is an historian who study tobacco politics, and he showed how the knowledge is a very powerful tool to repoliticize, and he showed how depoliticization is old is linked to ignorance. It produces ignorance, but ignorance produces also depolitization, because we forgot that there were other solutions, and we don't have the tools to show that our public policy produces different effects depending on the public, and maybe to share knowledge and to produce knowledge could be a good tool to repoliticize even locally. Sorry, it was long.
No, thank you, Cécile. Maybe a last joke before we shift and that Lindsay present the next session. Some people have found a solution to improve public debate here in Europe. They want to invite Taylor Swift to promote European elections and get people to vote for the next election, because they have seen the results of the fact that Taylor Swift was increasing the number of people voting, and they want to do the same in Europe, and they want to invite her as a guest star in Europe. So maybe we need stars to develop public debate too.
No, please.
Lindsay, do you want to, maybe we can end up now for now. Again, we will take care of all these great insight, and we will write for sure papers and blogs about that. But do you want to introduce what's next?
Yes, I'll do that just briefly. Thanks, Stefan. So as I said earlier, our next cycle, we're finishing this cycle. There may be we may come back to you with something about closing the theories of change conversation at some point, but to be determined. But for now, we'll finish this cycle and plan to begin our next one on February the 20th here in Vancouver, February the 21st, early in the morning for the folks in Australia and New Zealand. This cycle is co-hosted by Lily Raphael from City of Vancouver, who was here just here today, and Penny Hagen, who's with the lab in Auckland. And it will focus on connecting the inner and outer work of transformation in the public sector, really focusing on practices, competencies, skills, place-based ways of working, and how the small really connects with the large in systems transformation work. So that will be the focus of that cycle. Again, starting on February 20th. There's a link on the last slide that will take you to a blog post with some more information and where you can find the registration links. And a few other links on that last slide also to find your way into the website, into the recordings for these sessions. And I think that's everything for today. Peyvan, did I forget anything? Or Stefan and crew? Thank you to La 27e Région team for hosting this and designing this. And thank you so much, Cécile, for joining us today. That was a really interesting conversation. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Merci, Cécile. Bravo. Thank
Merci
you
à
all.
vous.
Merci.
Un très grand merci à vous.
Thank you.